The alien plasma bolt sizzled past Marine Sergeant Elena Vasquez's helmet, leaving a smoking crater in the concrete wall behind her. She pressed herself deeper into the rubble of what used to be New Berlin's Central District, her breathing steady despite the chaos erupting around her. The Kythera had been pushing hard for 3 days straight, their spider-like forms scuttling through the ruins with terrifying coordination. Vasquez. Corporal Martinez's voice cracked over the comm, panic bleeding through his usual composure. My Barrett's jammed solid. The firing pins completely seized. Elena turned to see Martinez struggling with the massive M82 anti-material rifle, his hands shaking as he tried to clear the malfunction. The weapon was their squad's only reliable answer to the Kythera's heavy assault mechs, and without it they were sitting ducks in this exposed position. Toss it here, Elena called out, extending her hand while keeping her eyes on the advancing enemy line. Martinez hesitated for a split second before sliding the heavy rifle across the debris-strewn ground. The moment her fingers closed around the familiar weight of the Barrett, something shifted in the air around them. The rifle felt different in her hands. Not just the mechanical precision she'd trained with for years, but something deeper. Elena's fingers moved automatically to the chamber, feeling for the obstruction that had Martinez stumped. Her movements were fluid, almost unconscious, as if she'd performed this exact maintenance procedure 1,000 times before. How did you? Martinez started to ask, but his words died as Elena's hands worked with impossible efficiency. She stripped the bolt assembly in seconds, cleared the jam, and reassembled the rifle without even looking down at her hands. Her eyes remained fixed on the Kythera advance, counting targets and calculating angles. What Martinez couldn't see was the small metal disc hanging from Elena's dog tags, hidden beneath her combat vest. The metal was unremarkable at first glance, just a simple bronze circle with a worn surface. But if someone looked closely, they would see tiny hash marks etched around the rim, 305 of them to be exact. Elena settled into a firing position, the Barrett scope finding its first target almost instantly. A Kythera assault mech, its 6 legs carrying it through the rubble with mechanical precision. The alien pilot probably felt safe in its armored shell, confident that human weapons couldn't penetrate its advanced shielding. The rifle bucked against Elena's shoulder, and the mech's head exploded in a shower of sparks and alien ichor. The body continued forward for 3 steps before crashing into a pile of twisted metal. Jesus Christ, whispered Private Chen, who had been watching through his own scope. That was a 1,000-meter shot uphill in crosswind conditions. The computer said it was impossible. Elena was already tracking her next target, another mech, this one trying to flank their position from the left. The rifle spoke again, and another Kythera pilot met its end. Then another. Each shot was perfect, each kill clean and immediate. Martinez stared at his rifle, then at Elena, then back at the rifle. He'd been using that weapon for 2 years, knew every quirk and tendency it had. But watching Elena work, it was like seeing the Barrett for the first time. In her hands, it wasn't just a tool. It was an extension of her will. Vasquez, Martinez said slowly, where did you learn to shoot like that? Elena didn't answer immediately. She was focused on a group of Kythera infantry, their chitinous forms moving in a standard assault formation. 3 shots, 3 kills. The formation dissolved into chaos as the survivors scattered for cover. Same place as everyone else, she finally replied, working the bolt with mechanical precision. Basic training, advanced marksmanship, scout sniper school. But even as she said it, Elena knew it wasn't entirely true. The skills felt older than her training, deeper than anything the Marines had taught her. Every time she touched a rifle, it was like remembering something she'd always known. The way wind affected trajectory, how gravity pulled at a bullet over distance, the precise moment when a target's movement became predictable. All of it came as naturally as breathing. Chen lowered his binoculars, his face pale beneath his helmet. Sergeant, I've been counting. That's 15 confirmed kills in less than 10 minutes. The Kythera are pulling back, Elena could see it too. The alien advance had stalled, their formations breaking apart as word spread through their ranks. The humans had a marksman and nowhere was safe. She tracked another target, a Kythera officer attempting to rally its troops, and put a round through its thorax from 800 meters. Martinez was still staring at her, pieces of a puzzle slowly clicking together in his mind. He'd served with Elena for 18 months, had seen her shoot dozens of times. She was good, exceptional even, but this was something beyond exceptional. This was impossible. That metal, he said suddenly, pointing at the small bump beneath her vest. I've seen you touch it before every mission. What is it? Elena's hand moved unconsciously to her chest, fingers finding the familiar shape of the bronze disc. For a moment, her concentration wavered, and she almost missed a Kithera sniper trying to get a beat on their position. Almost. The alien's rifle was spinning through the air in pieces before it could fire. Family heirloom, she said, but her voice carried a weight that suggested the words meant more than they implied. Been in my family for generations. The battlefield was quieting now. The Kithera had pulled back beyond effective range, leaving their dead scattered across the ruined cityscape. Elena kept the rifle trained on the distant tree line, but her mind was elsewhere, touching memories that felt both foreign and familiar. Martinez was about to press for more details when their radio crackled to life. All units, this is command. Satellite intel shows massive Kithera reinforcements moving toward your position. Estimate arrival in 6 hours. Prepare for extended engagement. Elena smiled grimly, adjusting her grip on the Barrett. 6 hours would give her plenty of time to test just how far this strange familiarity with the rifle extended. The metal against her chest seemed to grow warmer, as if responding to her thoughts. Around her, the squad began preparing defensive positions, but Elena remained still, watching and waiting. Somewhere in the distance, 300 more Kithera were about to learn that humanity's greatest weapon had never been technology. It had always been the humans themselves. The Kithera reinforcements arrived like a dark tide across the horizon, their forms silhouetted against the dying light of New Berlin's artificial sunset. Elena watched through her scope as hundreds of the spider-like aliens moved with perfect coordination. Their mechanical precision both beautiful and terrifying. Command wasn't kidding about massive reinforcements, Chen whispered, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. I count at least 300 hostiles, maybe more. Elena's finger found the bronze medal beneath her vest, and for a moment the chaos of the approaching battle faded away. Images flashed through her mind, not memories exactly, but something deeper. Trenches filled with mud and blood, the crack of bolt-action rifles, the whistle of incoming artillery, faces she'd never seen but somehow recognized, voices speaking in accents from a dozen different wars. Vasquez, Martinez's voice brought her back to the present. You seeing this? They're not attacking. They're just waiting. He was right. The Kithera force had stopped just beyond rifle range. Their formations spread across the ruined cityscape like pieces on a chessboard. Elena could see their officers moving between the ranks, but there was no immediate aggression. No rush to close the distance. They're studying us, Elena realized, adjusting her scope's magnification. They know there's a sniper here, and they're trying to figure out how to neutralize the threat without losing more troops. Through her scope, she could see the alien officers pointing in her general direction, their mandibles clicking in what she assumed was rapid communication. One of them, larger than the others and decorated with strange markings, seemed to be giving orders. Elena centered her crosshairs on the officer and held her breath. The shot was at the very edge of the Barrett's effective range, requiring her to account for wind drift, bullet drop, and the slight movement of her target. Any military manual would call it an impossible shot. The rifle bucked and the Kithera officer's head simply vanished. The reaction was immediate and violent. The entire alien formation erupted into motion, some seeking cover while others opened fire at Elena's suspected position. Holy shit, Martinez breathed, watching through his binoculars as the alien ranks dissolved into chaos. That had to be over 1,500 meters. The computer targeting system can't even calculate that range. Elena was already tracking her next target, a Kithera heavy weapons specialist setting up what looked like a plasma cannon. The alien never got the chance to fire. Neither did the 3 soldiers trying to protect it. But as Elena worked the bolt for her 5th shot, something strange happened. The bronze metal against her chest grew noticeably warm, and suddenly her vision sharpened beyond anything she'd ever experienced. She could see individual Kithera soldiers moving between buildings almost 2 kilometers away. More than that, she could somehow sense their intentions, predict their movements before they made them. A Kithera sniper was setting up on a rooftop 8 buildings away, thinking it was beyond human visual range. Elena put a round through its thorax before it could even deploy its rifle. Another alien was trying to flank their position through an underground tunnel. Elena shot the tunnel entrance, collapsing it and trapping the assault team inside. This isn't possible, Chen said, his voice barely a whisper. Nobody shoots like this. Not even with computer assistance. Martinez was staring at Elena with a mixture of awe and growing suspicion. He'd known her for over a year, had seen her service record, knew her background. Elena Vasquez, born in Chicago, raised by her grandmother after her parents died in a transport accident. Standard military family, nothing special about them. But the Elena sitting next to him wasn't the same woman he'd served with. This Elena moved with a confidence that seemed to come from decades of experience, not the 5 years since her enlistment. Her eyes held a hardness that spoke of battles fought in places Martinez had never heard of. "Your grandmother," Martinez said suddenly. "She was military too, wasn't she?" Elena's next shot took out a Kithera communications array, cutting off the alien's coordination. "Marines," she replied without taking her eye from the scope. "Served in the border wars 20 years ago. And before that?" For a moment, Elena's concentration wavered. Images flooded her mind. A woman in an old-style military uniform, her weathered hands teaching a young girl how to hold a rifle. The same bronze medal hanging around the woman's neck, its surface worn smooth by decades of handling. Her mother was Army, Elena said, her voice distant. Fought in the colonial uprising. And her mother before that was Navy, back during the resource wars. Martinez felt pieces of the puzzle clicking together. That medal you wear. It's been passed down, hasn't it? Through all of them. Elena didn't answer immediately. She was tracking a group of Kithera engineers trying to repair their communications equipment, her crosshairs following their movements with inhuman precision. 3 shots, 3 kills, and the alien's coordination remained shattered. But Martinez's questions had stirred something deeper. Elena found herself remembering conversations with her grandmother. Late nights when the old woman would clean her rifles and tell stories. Stories about marksmanship that seemed to run in their family like a genetic trait. About women who could make impossible shots when everything depended on it. "My great-great-grandmother," Elena said quietly, "fought at the Battle of Titan Station. Single-handedly held off a pirate boarding party for 6 hours. The records say she made over 200 confirmed kills that day. And before that," Elena's hand moved to the medal, feeling the worn surface and the tiny hash marks etched around its rim. Each mark represented a life taken, a battle won, a moment when everything hung in the balance and one woman's skill with a rifle made the difference. "My family has been fighting humanity's wars for over 2 centuries, Elena said, centering her scope on another target. "And we've been keeping count." The Kithera were regrouping now, their scattered formations trying to reform under the direction of surviving officers. Elena could see them adapting their tactics, spreading out to make targeting more difficult, using buildings for cover, trying to minimize their exposure. It wouldn't matter. Elena could feel the weight of generations behind her, the accumulated skill and experience of every woman who had carried the medal before her. Her great-great-grandmother's precision at Titan Station, her great-grandmother's patience during the siege of Europa, her grandmother's deadly efficiency in the border wars. All of it flowed through her now. Guided by instincts honed across 2 centuries of conflict, Chen was counting shots, his voice growing more amazed with each kill. 28 confirmed kills in 15 minutes. The Kithera don't know what to do. They're completely demoralized. Elena smiled grimly, working the bolt with mechanical precision. Through her enhanced vision, she could see alien officers trying to rally their troops, could sense their growing desperation as their carefully planned assault fell apart under the withering accuracy of a single human sniper. But she could also see something else moving in the distance, reinforcements for the reinforcements. A second wave of Kithera troops approaching from the north. Bigger than the first, and these ones were moving with the caution of soldiers who had learned to respect human marksmanship. The real battle was just beginning. The bronze medal grew hot against Elena's chest as the second wave of Kithera forces approached from the north. These weren't the same troops they'd been fighting. Even through her scope, Elena could see the difference. These aliens moved with the careful precision of veterans, their formations looser, their approach more cautious. "They're learning," Elena murmured, tracking the lead elements of the new force. "Someone's been telling them about human snipers." Martinez lowered his binoculars, his face grim. "Command's been quiet for 20 minutes. Think they're still out there?" Elena didn't answer immediately. She was focused on a Kithera officer near the center of the advancing formation, watching as it gestured toward her position. The alien's movements were different from the others, more fluid, more aware. This one had fought humans before. Her shot took the officer's head clean off, but instead of the chaos she'd expected, the Kithra formation barely paused. They'd been expecting it. Secondary leaders immediately took over, and the advance continued with barely a hitch. Smart, Elena admitted, working the bolt. They're using expendable officers as bait, trying to get me to reveal my exact position. Chen was scanning the approaching forces with growing alarm. Sergeant, I count over 500 hostiles in this wave. Even with your shooting, we can't hold against those numbers. Elena settled deeper into her firing position, feeling the familiar weight of the Barrett against her shoulder. The metal's warmth was spreading through her body now, and with it came something she couldn't quite explain. A sense of presence, as if she wasn't alone behind the rifle. Her next shot punched through a Kithra communications relay, but this time she sensed the return fire before she saw it. Elena rolled sideways just as plasma bolts seared the air where she'd been lying, their heat scorching the concrete behind her. Counter-sniper, she called out, already moving to a new position. They brought marksmen. Martinez and Chen scrambled for cover as more plasma bolts stitched across their defensive position. Elena could see the alien snipers now. 3 of them positioned on different rooftops, their movements coordinated and professional. How the hell do we fight marksmen with plasma rifles? Martinez shouted over the sound of incoming fire. They've got better range and no bullet drop. Elena was already settling into her new position, the Barrett's scope sweeping across the rooftops. Same way my ancestors fought superior technology, she said, centering her crosshairs on the nearest Kithra sniper. With superior skill. The alien marksman was good. Elena could see it adjusting for wind and elevation, its movements practiced and efficient. But it had made one critical mistake. It assumed human weapons followed the same physics as Kithra plasma technology. Elena's shot caught the alien sniper center mass just as it was lining up its own shot. The Kithra's plasma rifle discharged into the sky as its body tumbled from the rooftop, and Elena was already tracking the second marksman. But this one was smarter. It had watched the first sniper die and learned from the mistake. Instead of holding a fixed position, it was moving constantly, never staying exposed for more than a few seconds. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the metal's warmth pulse against her chest. When she opened them again, her vision had sharpened even further. She could see the alien sniper's pattern now, could predict where it would appear next. The shot seemed impossible even to Elena, firing at a target that was barely visible for half a second, compensating for movement in 3 dimensions, adjusting for atmospheric conditions that kept changing with the wind. But her finger squeezed the trigger with absolute confidence, and the Kithra marksman crumpled behind its cover. 2 down, Elena called out, already searching for the third sniper. Where's number 3? Martinez was scanning with his binoculars when the world exploded around them. The third Kithra marksman had been patient, waiting for Elena to expose herself while hunting its companions. Plasma bolts hammered their position, turning concrete to slag and filling the air with superheated gas. Elena felt something warm running down her arm and realized she'd been grazed by one of the shots. The pain was sharp but manageable. She'd had worse during training accidents. What concerned her more was the Barrett. She could see scorch marks along the barrel, and the scope's housing was partially melted. Rifle's damaged, she reported, examining the weapon quickly. Scope's gone, and I can't trust the barrel's true anymore. Chen stared at her in disbelief. So what do? We can't fight without the Barrett. Elena was already stripping the damaged scope from the rifle, her movements automatic and sure. Iron sights, she said simply, as if that explained everything. Martinez looked at the Barrett's basic iron sights, then at the Kithra forces still advancing in the distance. Vasquez, those targets are over 1 kilometer away. Nobody can make those shots with iron sights. Elena settled into her firing position, the rifle feeling strange but familiar without its scope. Through the simple iron sights, she could barely make out individual Kithra soldiers. But somehow that didn't matter. The metal against her chest was burning now, and with that heat came memories that weren't her own. She remembered her great-great-grandmother at Titan Station, making impossible shots with a rifle that had iron sights only. She remembered stories her grandmother had told about battles fought with weapons that wouldn't be considered adequate for training today, but had still turned the tide when skilled hands held them. Elena's first shot with the iron sights dropped a Kithira officer at 1,200 meters. The second killed an alien trying to set up a heavy weapon. The third eliminated another sniper that had thought itself safely hidden. "This is impossible," Martinez whispered, watching through his binoculars as Elena continued to make shots that defied every principle of marksmanship he'd ever learned. The human eye can't even properly distinguish targets at that range, let alone hit them with iron sights. But Elena wasn't relying on just her eyes anymore. The bronze medal seemed to be guiding her, connecting her to generations of women who had faced impossible odds with inadequate weapons and somehow found a way to win. Each shot felt predetermined, as if the rifle was simply carrying out decisions made by minds that understood warfare in ways Elena was only beginning to grasp. The third Kithira sniper made the mistake of thinking it could outshoot a human using iron sights. Elena put a round through its position and watched the alien's plasma rifle tumble from the rooftop. "All enemy marksmen down," she reported, working the bolt smoothly. "But we've got bigger problems." The main Kithira force had reached the outskirts of their defensive perimeter. Even with Elena's devastating marksmanship, there were simply too many aliens to stop them all. She could see Kithira assault troops taking cover behind rubble, preparing for a final rush that would overwhelm their position through sheer numbers. Martinez checked his ammunition. "I've got maybe 30 rounds left." "You?" Elena counted quickly. 18 rounds in the Barrett plus 2 partial magazines." Chen laughed bitterly. 20 confirmed kills against 500 hostiles. The math doesn't work in our favor. Elena's hand found the bronze medal one more time, feeling the 305 hash marks etched around its rim. Each mark represented a moment like this, a time when everything seemed impossible, when the odds were stacked against humanity, when one person's skill with a rifle was all that stood between victory and defeat. "The math has never worked in our favor," Elena said, centering her iron sights on the Kithira officer coordinating the final assault. "That's what makes us human." The Kithira final assault began at dawn, their forms silhouetted against the pale light filtering through New Berlin's shattered dome. Elena watched through her iron sights as wave after wave of alien soldiers advanced across the rubble-strewn landscape, their movements coordinated and relentless. "Here they come," Martinez whispered, checking his sidearm for the third time in as many minutes. "All of them." Elena had been counting targets since the advance began. 237 Kithira soldiers in the first wave, moving in perfect formation despite the devastating losses they'd already suffered. Behind them, she could see secondary formations preparing to follow, and beyond that, the distinctive shapes of heavy assault mechs. "Chen, how much demo do we have left?" Elena asked, not taking her eyes off the approaching enemy. 2 frag grenades and a claymore," Chen replied. "Not exactly arsenal depth." Elena nodded, working the Barrett's bolt to chamber a fresh round. The rifle felt different without its scope, lighter somehow, more responsive. The iron sights seemed crude compared to the high-tech optics she'd grown accustomed to. But there was something honest about them, something that connected her more directly to the weapon and the target. Her first shot of the day dropped the lead Kithira assault specialist, its body tumbling into a crater that had once been a fountain. The second eliminated an alien carrying what looked like a rocket launcher. The third and fourth shots came so quickly that Martinez barely heard the gap between them. 2 Kithira officers died within seconds of each other, their formations wavering as command structure dissolved. But for every alien Elena killed, 10 more took its place. The Kithira had learned from their earlier encounters with human marksmanship. They were using suppressing fire now, keeping Elena's head down while infantry advanced under cover. "They're adapting faster than we can kill them," Martinez observed, ducking as plasma bolts scorched the air overhead. "This isn't sustainable." Elena was already moving to a new firing position, the Barrett cradled in her arms like it weighed nothing. The bronze metal against her chest was so hot now that she could feel it through her combat vest, and with that heat came something extraordinary, a clarity of perception that went beyond anything human senses should be capable of. She could sense the Kithira movements before she saw them, could feel the rhythm of their advance like a pulse in her blood. More than that, she could see the pattern underlying their assault, the mathematical precision that governed their tactics. "They're using standard formation 7, Elena said, settling into her new position. "Overlapping fields of fire, coordinated advance, secondary reserves held back for exploitation." Martinez stared at her. How do you know Kithera tactical designations? Elena's shot answered him. A Kithera communications officer died at 900 meters, its equipment sparking as the round punched through both alien and machinery. Because humans have been fighting this formation for 200 years, she said, working the bolt. We just called it different names. The metal's heat was spreading through her body now, and with it came memories that couldn't possibly be her own. Elena remembered battlefields on a dozen different worlds, facing enemies that used tactics identical to what the Kithera were employing now. The names changed: pirates, separatists, aliens. But the fundamental principles of warfare remained constant. Her great-grandmother had faced Formation 7 at the Battle of Europa, where enemy forces had tried to overwhelm human positions through coordinated assault. The solution then had been the same as now: identify the key coordination points and eliminate them faster than they could be replaced. Elena's shooting took on a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with her heartbeat. Officers, communication specialists, heavy weapons teams. She picked off the Kithera command structure with surgical precision, watching their coordinated advance dissolve into confused clusters of soldiers. 43 confirmed kills, Chen reported, his voice filled with amazement. The entire first wave is in retreat. But Elena was already tracking the second wave, her iron sights finding new targets among the advancing aliens. These ones were different. She could see it in how they moved, how they positioned themselves. Veterans, probably drawn from elite units. They're sending their best now, Elena observed, centering her sights on a Kithera soldier whose equipment and bearing marked it as special forces. This is where it gets interesting. The alien she'd targeted seemed to sense her attention, ducking behind cover just as Elena pulled the trigger. The round sparked off concrete where the alien's head had been a split second before. Smart, Elena admitted, already tracking the soldier's movement. It knows about human snipers. What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse. The Kithera Special Forces soldier used every piece of cover available, never exposing itself for more than a fraction of a second. It advanced in short, unpredictable bursts, trying to close the distance while staying out of Elena's sight lines. Elena found herself enjoying the challenge. The bronze medal seemed to pulse with approval as she matched her skill against a truly worthy opponent. This was what the weapon had been designed for, not the slaughter of ordinary soldiers, but the precise elimination of threats that required every ounce of accumulated experience to handle. The alien made a mistake, just a small one, exposing a shoulder for half a second longer than it intended. Elena's shot took off the Kithera's primary weapon arm, and her follow-up round finished the job before the alien could reach cover. 51 kills, Martinez reported, but his voice carried a note of concern. Vasquez, you're burning through ammunition fast. How many rounds do you have left? Elena checked her ammunition without taking her eyes off the battlefield. 7 rounds in the rifle, 8 in my last magazine. The math was simple and brutal. 15 rounds against over 300 remaining Kithera soldiers. Even with Elena's impossible accuracy, the numbers didn't add up. Chen was doing the same calculation.
That's not enough.
Even if you don't miss a single shot, we're looking at 20-to-1 odds in close combat. Elena's hand moved to the bronze medal, feeling the warmth that had become almost unbearable. Through the simple iron sights, she could see the third wave of Kithera beginning their advance. Heavy assault troops backed by those mechanical walkers that had given human forces so much trouble. My grandmother told me a story once, Elena said, working the bolt to chamber one of her precious remaining rounds, about the Battle of Titan Station, when my great-great-grandmother faced impossible odds with a rifle that held 5 rounds. Martinez and Chen exchanged glances. They'd heard fragments of this story before, but never the full version. She had 200 pirates coming at her, and 5 rounds in an old chemical propellant rifle. The math didn't work then either. Elena's shot dropped a Kithera mech pilot, the massive war machine stumbling and crashing as its guidance system failed. 6 rounds left, so what did she do? Chen asked, his voice barely audible over the sound of approaching enemy fire. Elena smiled, the expression almost peaceful despite the chaos around them. She made every shot count, and when the ammunition ran out, she picked up their weapons and kept fighting. Her next shot eliminated a Kithera heavy weapons specialist. 5 rounds remaining. The thing about impossible odds, Elena continued, tracking another target through her iron sights, is that they assume the enemy knows who they're fighting. Another shot, another kill. 4 rounds left, and the Cathera were close enough now that Elena could see the individual markings on their chitinous armor. They think they're fighting a human sniper with a damaged rifle and limited ammunition, Elena said, centering her sights on the largest concentration of enemy troops. They don't realize they're fighting 200 years of accumulated human stubbornness. The bronze metal against her chest flared with heat so intense it was almost painful, and suddenly Elena could see everything with perfect clarity. Every Cathera soldier, every weapon, every piece of cover. More than that, she could see the exact sequence of shots needed to turn the tide of battle. 3 rounds left, and Elena Vasquez prepared to add her own chapter to a legend that had been building for 2 centuries. With only 3 rounds remaining, Elena watched the Cathera forces mass for what they clearly believed would be their final assault. The aliens had learned from their massive losses. They were using smokescreens now, coordinated suppressing fire, and overlapping fields of advance that made targeting individual soldiers nearly impossible. They're not giving you clean shots anymore, Martinez observed, watching the alien formations through his binoculars. Smart tactical adaptation. Elena studied the battlefield through her iron sights, the bronze metal burning against her chest like a small sun. The heat had become so intense that she could feel it through her combat vest. But instead of pain, it brought clarity. She could see beyond the smoke and chaos to the underlying structure of the Cathera assault. They're still thinking like machines, Elena said, tracking the movement patterns with mechanical precision. Perfect coordination, optimal positioning, calculated risk assessment. Her first shot seemed to disappear into the smoke without effect, but Elena was already working the bolt. 2 rounds left. Martinez was about to ask what she'd been aiming at, when a massive explosion erupted in the center of the Cathera formation. What the hell was that? Chen shouted, shielding his eyes from the brilliant flash. Elena was already lining up her second shot. Plasma ammunition storage, she said calmly. 1 round, properly placed, and their own weapons become the weapon. The explosion had torn a hole in the alien formation, but they were adapting even to that. Secondary formations moved to fill the gap, and Elena could see Cathera officers redirecting their troops around the crater her shot had created. 1 round left. Elena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the metal's heat flow through her body. When she opened them again, the battlefield had changed. She could see the mathematical precision underlying the Cathera advance, could track the flow of their formations like water finding the path of least resistance. More than that, she could see the single point where all those calculations intersected, the nerve center of their entire assault. There, Elena whispered, centering her iron sights on a Cathera officer positioned behind the main advance. It wasn't the largest alien or the most obviously important, but Elena could see the subtle signs that marked it as the tactical coordinator for the entire operation. Her final shot with the Barrett punched through the alien's thorax, and the effect was immediate and devastating. Without central coordination, the Cathera formation began to collapse in on itself. Units moved into each other's lines of fire. Orders became confused, and the perfect mechanical precision dissolved into chaos. Elena set the empty Barrett aside and drew her sidearm, a standard-issue plasma pistol that felt crude compared to the rifle she'd been wielding. Around her, Martinez and Chen were staring at the alien formation's collapse with expressions of amazement. "How did you know?" Martinez asked. "How did you know which one was the coordinator?" Elena was already moving toward a new position, her movements fluid and purposeful. "Same way I knew about Formation 7, she said. "Because humans have been fighting coordinated enemies for centuries, and the weak points never really change." The Cathera were regrouping now, their officers shouting orders in their clicking language, as they tried to restore order to the chaos Elena's final shot had created. But they'd lost their tactical advantage, and worse, they'd lost the psychological edge that came from believing human resistance was futile. Elena could see it in how they moved now. Hesitation where there had been certainty, caution where there had been mechanical confidence. The aliens had started this battle believing they understood human capabilities. Now they were discovering that 2 centuries of human warfare had produced something they hadn't accounted for. "Contact front," Chen shouted, opening fire with his assault rifle as the first Cathera soldiers reached their defensive perimeter. The aliens were advancing in small groups now, having abandoned their coordinated formations in favor of rapid, chaotic rushes. Elena drew her sidearm and began moving between positions, using the rubble-strewn terrain to her advantage. The plasma pistol felt alien in her hands after hours with the Barrett, but the bronze metal's heat seemed to adapt her movements to any weapon she touched. Her first 3 shots dropped a Kithra assault team that had thought they could outflank the human position. The aliens had been moving with the fluid grace of their species, but Elena had predicted their path and positioned herself perfectly to intercept them. "Behind you," Martinez called out, spinning to engage targets coming from their left flank. Elena was already moving, the plasma pistol tracking smoothly to new targets. The Kithra soldiers were good, better than the troops they'd faced earlier, but they were still thinking in terms of normal human reflexes and capabilities. Elena wasn't normal. She moved through the defensive position like she'd been fighting in these ruins for years instead of hours. Every piece of cover was exactly where she expected it to be. Every angle of fire calculated to perfection. The bronze metal against her chest had become so hot that it should have been painful, but instead it felt like a second heartbeat, pulsing in rhythm with her movements. "Vasquez!" Martinez's voice carried a note of panic. "Heavy mech, 2 o'clock. Elena turned to see one of the Kithra assault mechs picking its way through the rubble, its weapon systems tracking toward their position. The mechanical walker was damaged. She could see scorch marks from earlier fighting, but still functional, enough to end their resistance in seconds. The plasma pistol in Elena's hand wouldn't even scratch the mech's armor, but as she studied the war machine, she could see the same patterns that had governed every other aspect of this battle. The Kithra built their weapons with mechanical precision, which meant mechanical vulnerabilities. Elena sprinted toward the fallen debris of a collapsed building, her movements drawing the mech's attention exactly as she'd intended. The war machine's main gun tracked her progress, its targeting systems calculating the optimal moment to fire. Elena dove behind cover just as the mech's plasma cannon discharged, superheated gas washing over her position, but she'd counted on the weapon's recharge cycle, and she was already moving before the aliens could adjust their aim. The plasma pistol wouldn't penetrate the mech's armor, but it didn't need to. Elena put 3 rapid shots into the war machine's primary sensor array, blinding the pilot inside. The mech stumbled, its movements becoming erratic as backup systems tried to compensate for the loss of its main targeting system. That was all the opening Elena needed. She sprinted toward the war machine, using its momentary confusion to get close enough for what she had in mind. The Claymore Chen had mentioned earlier was still attached to her gear, its directional charge designed to clear infantry from defensive positions. Elena slammed the explosive device against the mech's leg joint and triggered the detonator. The shaped charge, designed for anti-personnel work, wasn't powerful enough to destroy the war machine outright, but it severed the hydraulic lines that powered the leg assembly. The mech toppled sideways, its pilot struggling to maintain control as the war machine crashed into the rubble. Elena was already moving, putting herself in position to finish what she'd started. The pilot's hatch was opening, the Kithra inside preparing to abandon its damaged vehicle. Elena's final shots with the plasma pistol ended the threat before the alien could escape. "Impossible," Chen whispered, staring at the fallen mech. "You just took down a heavy assault walker with a sidearm and a demolition charge." Elena holstered her weapon and retrieved the Barrett, checking it for damage. The rifle was empty, but its basic mechanisms were still functional. "My great-grandmother took down a pirate gunship with a chemical explosive and a targeting laser," she said, as if that explained everything. Martinez was scanning the battlefield with his binoculars, his voice tight with concentration. "The Kithra are pulling back. I count maybe 50 hostiles still active, and they're retreating beyond effective range." Elena could see it too. The alien forces were withdrawing in good order, but they were withdrawing. For the first time since the battle began, the Kithra weren't advancing. "They're regrouping," Elena observed, settling into a new firing position despite her empty rifle, learning from what just happened. "They'll be back." Chen checked his ammunition and shook his head grimly. "We're almost out of everything. When they come back, we won't be able to stop them." Elena's hand found the bronze metal beneath her vest, feeling the heat that had become as familiar as her own pulse. Through the Barrett's iron sights, she could see the Kithra officers in the distance, planning their next assault. "They're not just fighting 3 humans with limited ammunition," Elena said, her voice carrying a confidence that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than personal experience. "They're fighting every human who ever stood against impossible odds and refused to surrender." The metal pulsed with heat, and Elena could feel the presence of every woman who had carried it before her. Their skill, their determination, their absolute refusal to accept defeat when humanity's survival was at stake. "Let them regroup," Elena said, centering her empty rifle on the distant enemy formation. "Let them plan. When they come back, they're going to learn why humans have survived every war we've ever fought." The Kithra returned 2 hours later with a force 3 times larger than anything they'd sent before. Elena watched through her iron sights as nearly 1,000 alien soldiers spread across the ruined landscape, their movements cautious but determined. Behind them, she could see the distinctive silhouettes of heavy artillery pieces being positioned for bombardment. "Well," Martinez said, checking his sidearm for the 10th time, "at least we know they're taking us seriously now." Elena was studying the enemy formation, noting how the aliens had adapted their tactics yet again. No more coordinated advances or formation fighting. Instead, they were preparing for a systematic destruction of the human position through overwhelming firepower. "They're not even trying to preserve the area anymore," Chen observed, watching alien engineers set up what looked like plasma mortars. "They're going to level everything within a kilometer radius." The bronze metal against Elena's chest had cooled slightly during the lull, but now it was beginning to warm again as the Kithra prepared their final assault. With the heat came memories that felt more vivid than her own experiences, images of battles fought across 2 centuries of human conflict. "My grandmother told me about the siege of Ceres Station," Elena said, her voice calm despite the approaching bombardment. 12,000 enemy troops against 43 humans in a mining facility. The defenders held for 6 days without resupply. Martinez stared at her. 43 against 12,000? That's impossible. Elena's smile was grim but confident. The enemy thought so too. That's why they lost. The first alien artillery rounds began falling around their position, each impact shaking the ground and filling the air with debris. The Kithra weren't trying for precision. They were simply saturating the area with explosive force, planning to advance through the rubble once human resistance had been pulverized. Elena moved through the bombardment like she could predict exactly where each round would fall. She flowed from cover to cover, the empty Barrett cradled in her arms. Her movement so fluid that Martinez and Chen found themselves following her lead without conscious thought. "How are you doing that?" Chen shouted over the sound of explosions. "How do you know where the shells are going to hit?" Elena didn't answer immediately. She was focused on something Martinez couldn't see, patterns. In the bombardment that spoke of artillery, tactics she recognized from stories passed down through generations of her family. "Standard suppression pattern," Elena called back, leading them toward a section of ruins that seemed to offer better protection. "Same one the colonial separatists used at New Geneva. My great-great-grandmother survived that bombardment too." They reached the new position just as a massive explosion obliterated their previous cover. Elena settled into a firing position despite having no ammunition, her movements automatic and sure. "Vasquez," Martinez said, crawling up beside her. "What exactly are you planning to do with an empty rifle?" Elena was studying the Kithra artillery positions through her iron sights, measuring distances and angles with mechanical precision. "Same thing my family has always done," she said. "Whatever it takes." The bombardment was lifting now, the alien artillery shifting its aim to create a corridor for advancing troops. Elena could see Kithra soldiers massing for the final assault, their numbers so overwhelming that the very ground seemed to writhe with movement. "Contact incoming," Chen shouted, opening fire with his remaining ammunition as the first alien soldiers reached their perimeter. Elena drew her sidearm and began engaging targets, her shots precise and economical despite the chaos around them. But even with her impossible accuracy, there were simply too many enemies. For every Kithra she dropped, 10 more took its place. Martinez's rifle clicked empty and he transitioned to his sidearm. "Elena, whatever miracle you're planning, now would be a good time." Elena was down to her last few shots when she heard it, a sound that made her heart leap with recognition. The distinctive whine of human aerospace engines. "Approaching fast from the south. Cavalry's here," she announced, just as the first human dropships appeared over the horizon. The Kithra had been so focused on the 3 humans in the ruins that they'd failed to maintain proper air defense protocols. The dropships descended into their formation like avenging angels, disgorging squads of Marine infantry while providing close air support with devastating efficiency. But what caught Elena's attention wasn't the arriving reinforcements. It was the figure emerging from the lead dropship, a woman in Marine dress uniform, her bearing unmistakably military despite her advanced age. "Grandmother?" Elena whispered, unable to believe what she was seeing. The older woman spotted Elena immediately and began moving toward their position with the fluid grace of a veteran combat soldier. She carried an ancient rifle, a weapon that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than on an active battlefield. "Elena Maria Vasquez," the woman called out, her voice carrying clearly over the sound of battle. "That medal belongs to someone who knows how to use it properly." Elena's grandmother reached their position and immediately took cover beside her granddaughter. The rifle in her hands was clearly the same weapon Elena had seen in old family photos, a chemical propellant sniper rifle that predated modern plasma technology by decades. "Grandmother, what are you doing here?" Elena asked, staring at the ancient weapon. "Same thing every woman in our family does when the shooting starts," her grandmother replied, working the bolt on her antique rifle with practiced ease, making sure the enemy remembers why they shouldn't mess with humans. The old woman's first shot dropped a Kithera officer at 1,500 meters, a distance that should have been impossible for such an outdated weapon. Her second shot eliminated an alien heavy weapons specialist. Her third punched through the armor of a Kithera mech. Elena watched in amazement as her grandmother worked the bolt with mechanical precision, each shot finding its target with the same impossible accuracy Elena had been demonstrating all day. The bronze medal around Elena's neck seemed to pulse in rhythm with her grandmother's shooting. "How many?" Elena asked, understanding instinctively what she meant. 212, her grandmother replied, centering her crosshairs on another target. "Started counting at Titan Station just like my mother did. Just like her mother before that." Elena felt pieces of understanding click together. The medal wasn't just a family heirloom, it was a record. A tally of lives taken in humanity's defense, passed down through generations of women who had stood against impossible odds. "The 305 marks," Elena said, feeling the warm bronze against her chest. "Every woman who carried that medal added her own count," her grandmother confirmed, dropping another Kithera soldier. "Your great-great-grandmother started with 47 at Titan Station. Your great-grandmother added 93 during the border wars. Your great-aunt contributed 62 in the colonial uprising." Elena's hand moved to the medal, understanding finally flooding through her. "And you?" Her grandmother's smile was fierce and proud. "I added 212 during my service. And now it's your turn to add yours." Elena looked down at the empty barrett in her hands, then at the battle raging around them. The arriving Marines were pushing the Kithera back, but the fight was far from over. "I don't have any ammunition left," Elena said. Her grandmother reached into her pack and pulled out a magazine of Barrett rounds. "Then it's a good thing your old grandmother never travels light." Elena accepted the ammunition with reverence, loading the Barrett with hands that seemed steadier than they had any right to be. The bronze medal pulsed with heat as she chambered the first round. "How many so far?" her grandmother asked, settling into her own firing position. Elena had been keeping count unconsciously throughout the battle. 73 confirmed kills. Her grandmother nodded approvingly. "A good start. But the day's not over yet." Elena settled behind her rifle, the iron sights finding their first target among the retreating Kithera forces. The metal against her chest burned with the accumulated weight of 2 centuries of human determination. 74, Elena announced as her shot found its mark. The number would climb higher before the day was done. 3 days after the Battle of New Berlin, Elena sat in the temporary command post that had been established in the ruins of the city's central district. Around her, Marine engineers worked to restore communications and coordinate the ongoing cleanup operations. The Kithera had withdrawn completely from this sector, their forces scattered and demoralized by the devastating losses they'd suffered. Colonel Harrison, the commanding officer of the relief force, reviewed the after-action reports with an expression of amazement that hadn't left his face since the debriefing began. "Sergeant Vasquez," he said, looking up from his tablet. "According to these reports, you achieved 137 confirmed kills over the course of a single engagement. With iron sights, against technologically superior opponents. Elena's hand moved unconsciously to the bronze medal beneath her uniform. The metal had cooled to normal temperature, but she could still feel the weight of it. Not just the physical weight, but the accumulated significance of 2 centuries of service. "Yes, sir," she replied simply. Colonel Harrison set down his tablet and studied Elena with the expression of a man trying to solve a puzzle that defied conventional logic. "Sergeant, I've been fighting aliens for 15 years. I've seen some remarkable marksmanship in that time, but what you accomplished here goes beyond remarkable. It goes beyond human." Elena's grandmother, who had been sitting quietly in the corner cleaning her antique rifle, looked up with a slight smile. "Colonel, may I?" Harrison nodded, clearly curious to hear what the older woman had to say. "Colonel," Elena's grandmother began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen more battles than most people could imagine, "you're looking at this the wrong way. You think what my granddaughter did was superhuman, but it's actually the most human thing possible." She stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the ruins where Kithara bodies still lay scattered among the debris. "Humans have been fighting impossible odds for our entire history as a species. We've faced predators that were faster, stronger, better armed. We've fought diseases that should have wiped us out, natural disasters that should have ended our civilization, and enemies that outnumbered us 1,000 to 1. Elena watched her grandmother speak, seeing for the first time the full weight of experience that the older woman carried. This wasn't just a veteran Marine. This was a living repository of human military tradition. "But we survived," her grandmother continued, "because we developed something our enemies couldn't match. We learned to pass down not just knowledge but skill, not just training but instinct. Every generation of warriors built on the experience of those who came before." She turned back to face the room, her eyes finding the bronze medal that was partially visible at Elena's collar. "That medal has been carried by 5 generations of women in our family. Each one added their own experience to what came before. When Elena holds that rifle, she's not just drawing on her own training, she's channeling 2 centuries of accumulated expertise." Colonel Harrison frowned. "With respect, ma'am, that sounds more like mysticism than military science." Elena's grandmother laughed. "Colonel, have you ever wondered why human snipers consistently outperform alien marksmen, despite our supposedly inferior technology?" Harrison considered the question. It was true that human snipers had developed an almost legendary reputation among alien forces, though he'd never really thought about why. "It's because aliens approach marksmanship like a science," Elena's grandmother explained. "They calculate angles, compensate for environmental factors, and execute shots with mechanical precision. But humans approach it like an art. We feel the wind, we sense the target's movement. We make adjustments based on instincts that have been honed by generations of practice." Elena understood now, the impossible shot she'd made, the ability to predict enemy movements, the way the rifle had seemed to become an extension of her will. All of it was the result of accumulated human experience, passed down through generations and focused into a single moment of need. "The Kithara lost this battle," Elena said, speaking for the first time since the debriefing began, "because they tried to fight humans using alien logic. They calculated our capabilities based on our technology and our individual training. They didn't account for what makes us human." Martinez, who had been listening quietly from his chair across the room, shook his head in amazement. "So when you made those impossible shots, you were drawing on the experience of your ancestors?" Elena's hand touched the metal again, feeling the 342 hash marks that now decorated its rim. She'd added 37 marks of her own during the battle, each one representing a moment when human determination had triumphed over alien superiority. "Not just my ancestors," Elena corrected. "Every human who ever refused to surrender when the odds were impossible. Every warrior who stood against overwhelming force and found a way to win. Every person who looked at certain defeat and decided to fight anyway." Colonel Harrison was beginning to understand. "You're saying that human military effectiveness isn't just about individual skill or technology. It's about continuity," Elena's grandmother confirmed. "It's about the fact that every human soldier carries the accumulated experience of every warrior who came before them. We don't just fight with rifles and tactics, we fight with the collected wisdom of our entire species." Elena stood and moved to join her grandmother at the window. Outside, Marine recovery teams were processing the battlefield, counting enemy dead and cataloging captured equipment. The final tally would show that a force of over 1,500 Kithera soldiers had been defeated by 3 humans with limited ammunition and damaged equipment. The Kithera will study this battle, Elena observed. They'll analyze our tactics, try to understand how we achieve such disproportionate results. And they'll miss the point entirely, her grandmother added with satisfaction. They'll focus on the technical aspects, the rifle, the ammunition, the environmental conditions. They won't understand that the real weapon was 200 years of human stubbornness refined into military art. Colonel Harrison gathered his reports and stood to leave. Sergeant Vasquez, you and your squad are being recommended for the highest decorations our service can award. What you accomplished here will be studied at military academies for generations. Elena nodded respectfully, but her attention was already elsewhere. Through the window, she could see transport ships arriving to evacuate wounded Marines and ferry in reinforcements. The war against the Kithera was far from over, and there would be other battles where human forces faced impossible odds. Colonel, Elena said, turning back to face him, request permission to remain with frontline units. Harrison raised an eyebrow. Sergeant, you could write your own ticket after this. Staff position, training command, even early retirement with full honors. Why stay in the combat zone? Elena's hand found the bronze medal one more time, feeling the weight of history and responsibility it represented. Because this medal doesn't belong in a safe assignment, sir. It belongs wherever humans are fighting against impossible odds. Her grandmother smiled with obvious pride. The medal chooses its bearer, Colonel, and it's chosen well. As the command staff filed out of the temporary headquarters, Elena and her grandmother remained at the window, watching the sun set over the ruined city. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new challenges, new opportunities for humans to prove that superior technology and overwhelming numbers weren't enough to defeat a species that refused to surrender. The bronze medal hung heavy around Elena's neck, its surface warm with accumulated purpose. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of transport ships preparing for departure, carrying the news of humanity's latest impossible victory to command centers across the galaxy. The Kithera had learned something important during the Battle of New Berlin, though they probably didn't realize it yet. They'd learned that fighting humans wasn't just about defeating individual soldiers or overcoming tactical positions. They were fighting the accumulated determination of an entire species. Every generation of warriors who had stood against the dark and refused to yield. Their experience distilled into medals and weapons and stories passed down through families who understood that some things were worth any sacrifice. Elena touched the medal one final time and smiled. The count stood at 342, but she had a feeling it wouldn't stay there for long. After all, the war was just beginning.